This is Oa and Vohl. Last episode they opened the gate to the deepest part of Blackfathom Deeps. This time they're about to face their greatest fears. What could possibly go wrong? Almost immediately after engaging a nearby turtle, Oa lost aggro. Having decided that a heavily armored paladin was not nearly as appealing, the turtle instead made a beeline for Vohl. Oa got the aggro back, and the turtle was defeated. The next turtle was already waiting just beyond the entrance. Akumai, the dungeon's final boss, had presumably placed these creatures here to guard his lair. In fairness, their heavy armor made them reasonably convincing bodyguards. Unfortunately for them, they were no match for Oa and Vohl. On a side note, this cave also happened to be one of the more beautiful places in Blackfathom Deeps. The turtle rewarded Oa and Vohl with an axe that, rather unfortunately, neither of them could use. With that guardian defeated, only one heavily spike-shelled enemy remained between the two adventurers and Akumai himself. Oa took a quick look at Akumai, who had chosen to go to the very back of the cave. It was probably a sensible decision. Joining the fight before being invited would only have made things unnecessarily complicated. Before taking on Akumai, Oa decided it was the perfect time for one final drink and a short break. Vohl, however, had no intention of waiting and tried to start the encounter alone. Fortunately, this was hardly an unusual situation. Oa had long since grown accustomed to Vohl's enthusiasm for beginning fights before everyone else was quite ready, and managed to taunt the boss before he could arrive her. As usual, Vohl contributed an impressive amount of single-target damage. Apart from dealing respectable damage to the paladin, however, the dungeon's final boss had surprisingly few dangerous abilities. Oa could not help but think that Akumai might have benefited from taking a few lessons from Aragorn. Then again, living alone at the bottom of a cave did not exactly offer many opportunities for professional development. Akumai's only notable ability was Poison Cloud, but it could be dispelled with ease, leaving the boss with very little to threaten the pair. One thought did cross Oa's mind, however. With 3 heads, Akumai could realistically have satisfied an entire head-collecting quest all by himself. There might even have been room for one more adventurer in the group if only one head is needed. As it happened, though, the Alliance had shown remarkable restraint this time and hadn't asked anyone to bring back his heads. Not long afterward, Akumai finally fell. Yet again, the loot favored Vohl, rewarding her with another genuinely useful upgrade. At this rate, she was beginning to develop a rather impressive collection of dungeon rewards. With Akumai defeated, Oa was already preparing himself for whatever challenge might await next. Then something happened that neither he nor Vohl had expected. As it turned out, reading was not one of Oa's greatest strengths. Without giving it much thought, he accepted and was immediately teleported back to Darnassus. It was a remarkable demonstration that the most dangerous mechanic in Blackfathom Deeps had not been the final boss after all, but a friendly NPC with an unexpected dialogue option. Oa began sorting through his quest log to decide which quest to turn in first. Vohl wasn't far behind. By now the two had become rather efficient at following each other's footsteps across Azeroth. The reward turned out to be exactly what he had come to expect. Yet another piece of leather armor. Male equipment continued to remain frustratingly elusive, so leather would have to do for the time being.
Farewell. Light be with you. Be careful.
Vohl also handed in her copy of the quest, proving that at least experience points could be distributed equally. With every quest in Darnassus finally turned in, Oa set off for Orbadine. Before continuing his journey, however, he had to take a closer look at the shield he had just received. While its attributes were not exactly ideal for a paladin, the additional armor and increased chance to block attacks still made it a rather tempting upgrade. It suddenly occurred to Oa that he seemed to spend a surprising amount of time in Night Elf territory. Soon afterward, Oa arrived in Orbadine, where yet another quest was ready to be turned in. At this point, he was beginning to suspect that questing consisted primarily of carrying messages from one person to another, with the occasional dungeon conveniently placed in between. The final quest on Oa's list led him all the way to Ironforge. Unfortunately, his Hearthstone was still bound to Lakeshire from his and Vohl's adventures there. After collecting the gold from several successful auctions, Oa boarded a griffin bound for Ironforge.
See you around.
This time he wisely decided to avoid the deep-rung tram. While the tram had its charm, flying generally involved considerably fewer detours and far less waiting around. Upon arriving in Ironforge, Oa noticed that Vohl had gone offline. He assumed she would be back before long. In the meantime, there were still plenty of things that could be accomplished without her, even if they were usually far more entertaining together. Oa wandered through the great halls of Ironforge on his way to his next destination. Surrounded by towering stone columns and the constant sound of hammers striking anvils, it was difficult not to appreciate why so many dwarves seemed perfectly content never leaving the city. Oa made his way to turn in the final completed quest, and upon receiving a new ring as a reward, was pleasantly surprised. It might not have been the most spectacular piece of equipment, but after the ongoing struggle to find suitable mail armor, he had learned not to be too picky about upgrades. Meanwhile, Vohl had logged back in and was ready for a solo adventure of her own. Since the two shared the same quests for Blackfathom Deeps, her journey also led toward Ironforge. Before setting off, however, she stopped to sell a collection of items that had long since outlived their usefulness. If only there had been a way to speed up the process.
See you around.
With the selling done, it was finally time to repair the wear and tear from their adventures. As Vohl crossed the bridge just outside Lakeshire, she couldn't help but remember the quests they had completed there not so long ago. Looking back, those days had felt almost peaceful. Somehow every place Oa and Vohl had ventured to since then seemed just a little darker than the last. With her preparations complete, it was now Vohl's turn to board the Griffon to Ironforge. Just as Oa had before her, she took the opportunity to survey the world from a safe distance. One location in particular caught her eye, the Altar of Storms. It certainly looked like the sort of place that would become a problem eventually. Fortunately, today was not that day. Many of the places Vohl flew over looked distinctly uninviting. Judging by the oppressive heat below, she was quickly reminded of the Barrens. Some regions of Azeroth, it seemed, had independently reached the exact same conclusion about what constituted an unpleasant climate. Not long afterward, Vohl arrived in Ironforge. Just like Oa before her, she first had to find her way through the city's maze of tunnels and halls before locating the quest giver. The effort was about to get rewarded with a brand new ring, proving that almost getting lost occasionally had its benefits. She followed the same route as Oa, passing through the Hall of Explorers and into the Forlorn Cavern, where the quest giver was waiting. While Oa had simply been pleased to receive a useful ring, Vohl was equally delighted to add yet another reward to her steadily expanding collection. Meanwhile, Vohl had reached level 26, which meant there was one important stop left before continuing her journey, a visit to her class trainer. After all, no priest would willingly leave new abilities sitting on the shelf when they could instead make future adventures just a little less hazardous. Passing through the Forlorn Cavern once again, Vohl eventually entered the Mystic Ward. Rumor had it that paladins could also find their class trainers there, although that knowledge was of limited use to a priest. All this walking did, however, give Vohl an idea. A mount would make a rather fine addition to their journey, and in only a few more levels the endless marching would finally come to an end, or at least become considerably faster. If you'd like to join Oa and Vohl on the rest of their adventure through Azeroth, be sure to like the video and subscribe. There are still plenty of dungeons, questionable decisions, and unexpected victories waiting just around the corner.